Doing cold outbound does not have to be complicated, but oftentimes when you're just getting started, it can feel like there's a lot of moving parts, and it's really easy to get lost in the weeds. So in today's video, I'm going to break down actionable steps that you can take immediately after this video to go from zero to being able to execute cold outbound. Now, a common mistake that people make is that they assume that with cold outbound, you just need to have high volume in order to have high success. And to some extent that can be true, but it's really important when you're first starting out to get things right, because if you haven't done cold outbound before, you're still trying to figure out what message lands with a cold audience. The first step is to actually define who your ideal customers or your ideal buyers could be. Now, there's kind of a couple of ways you can look at this. The first way is by looking at the end users, right? The people who might be using or benefiting from your product or service. But the other way of looking at it, and especially if you're going into larger companies, is by looking at it from two lenses. The first lens is who are the end users, but number two, who are the decision makers? Because ultimately, if you do end up selling to larger organizations, the end users are not going to be able to have enough authority to purchase something that is, say, higher ticket. But someone who is a decision maker would have a discretionary budget and they can allocate some of that towards your solution. Now, whilst you're defining this out, and that can look like things like job titles, you can look at industries, locations, one thing I would go deeper on, if you can, is to look at the trigger points. So for example, let's say you're selling a recruiting tool and you've just found out that a company has raised a round of capital. That's a good signal to know that this company is probably going to hire and therefore will actually need your solution. It's a really good fit, and you can use that signal in your messaging. After you've defined what your ideal buyers as well as your ideal users look like, and maybe that's the same person, especially if you're selling to smaller companies, then you need to articulate the problem that you are solving in excruciating detail. And it's even better if you've experienced this problem yourself. Now, if you're struggling with this, I've put some text in the description that you can paste into ChatGPT. You can use the following prompt. I am building X, and then just replace that with the product you're selling. I am selling to Y, so the ideal customer profile that we just defined, to solve Z, the problem that you are experiencing. Can you help me break down the alignment between the problems they experience and how my product can solve this? Please find a way to communicate this in 50 to 70 characters. And the reason why we want to communicate it really concisely is because when we use this sort of base level understanding inside of our messaging, we want to keep it super short and super to the point. People don't read long messages, right? 99% of the time. You might have a weird edge case here and there, but most of the time they won't. So you want to keep things to the point. Step 2, get clear on what your sales funnel looks like. Now, in my last video, I did touch upon this for low ticket SaaS, but if you are doing something that is more higher ticket, then typically what you would want to do is sort of get a sense of what your sales cycle should look like. So for example, if your contract value is between, say, $1,000 a year to $10,000 a year, ideally you want to try to wrap up those deals within a month's period. Typically. So you normally get on 1 to 2 calls. In your earlier days, you might find you might be doing a lot more than that, just because you're still getting the reps and you're still figuring out how to get it done or how to get the deal done. But typically what those calls look like is a first call will be a discovery call where you're just sort of trying to understand how they're currently solving the problem that they're experiencing, and then just seeing if there's alignment between your solution as well to their problems. And if there's time, potentially showing them how you could help them. And that's also assuming that your demo is pretty short. The second call is typically going to be a negotiation of some kind, and that's going to be talking about terms. So for example, let's say you do an annual contract, but they want to do a pilot first. So talking about things like that, or talking about different aspects about the product to make sure that it's in alignment to what they need. Now, if you start going for larger contracts, let's say more than $10,000, let's say $20,000 to $100,000, and as you develop over time, maybe that might go into sometimes even in the millions of dollars, especially in enterprise software. Now, typically those sales cycles are going to be a lot longer. They're going to be between 3 months on the bare minimum, all the way down to like as long as 2 years. Genuinely, it can be a really, really long time. Those longer time frames typically occur with those larger contracts because you're still building out all of the business cases that can be worthwhile for the buyer, and you're going through a ton of hoops to try to get the deal done. Now, typically what this does look like, at least at a high level, is you're going to have a first call, and that's going to be typically either with like an end user, or it's going to be someone in the department that you're trying to sell into that would find a benefit from your solution. You're going to ask the person who you're speaking to take you up a rung. So that will be that person's direct boss or their line manager. And you're going to walk them through of the research you've gathered from the discovery that you've done. And you're going to just try to champion your way up and up and up the leadership flagpole until you can get to C-suite. Now, you might not always get there. What you'll find in between is that you might get a portion of the way there with your ideal department, and you have to build a business case. So what that's going to look like is doing a pilot that could either be a paid pilot, assuming that your decision maker or your champion has any sort of discretionary budget, or it might be a free pilot. And you're just trying to prove value, at least on a small scale. Then you can start taking that business case and you can champion up the flagpole and keep going up and up and up until you've gotten to leadership and you've been able to get to the decision maker and be able to sell your solution. And eventually what you might find is that the contract value might start smaller than you'd like, but you can actually expand that contract over time. Step 3, get clear on your positioning. Now, do you remember back in step 1, you had that prompt to give you a clear articulation of how your product actually aligns with that prospect's problem? This is where that's going to come into gear. You're going to take the information that you got from that prompt and you're just going to try to synthesize it down and whittle it down into as few words as possible. And ultimately, what you want to get to is a position where you can clearly explain in simple language why someone should care about what you're selling. And you should ask yourself, are you solving a burning problem? Because you could have a product that could be really, really great for one audience and terrible for another. For example, you might have a time tracking tool, and that could be terrible for salespeople, but that could be exceptional for lawyers. Are you actually able to clearly articulate how you can solve a person's problem? And a lot of people, especially founders, they assume that their product is the best thing in the world and that everybody should care about their product. And you've probably heard it before, build it and they will come. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. People care about solving their problems. They don't care about your product's features. Don't sell your features, sell the problem. Especially with cold outreach, don't ever start to talk about all of these nitty-gritty features that you have unless they are absolutely in 100% alignment to the problem that you are solving and not just a nice to have. And the way you can sort of get away with your positioning is you could try to stop asking for the same things that everyone else does. Everybody keeps asking for 15 minutes or to have a call. Be creative, be a bit different. Don't be afraid to be different. And that's a good thing to try to stand out. Now, obviously, there are some people who can take this to the nth degree, and if you do go a bit too extreme, that's probably not a good idea. But you want to be creative, you want to be playful a little bit if you are targeting creative and playful audiences, because understanding your audience's tonality is also super important. But ultimately, try to keep things really concise, to the point, and be a little bit creative with it. Now, the exception that I will make to this is if you are starting out, you've got no users whatsoever, and you're just trying to get usage. Advice that I once received was that if you can't get revenue, get usage. Because when you get usage, you can get evidence that you are who you say you are. And then as a result of getting that evidence, you can now start to get revenue because now you've built up a portfolio of case studies to say that, hey, I am this person and that we can deliver X results. And that's what people want to see. They want to see certainty that they can achieve a certain outcome. Or alternatively, they don't mind working with people who are super early stage and rooting for the underdog. Because some people like to help people who are just getting started in their journey. They like to root for those kind of people. So if you are doing cold outbound to some people and you aren't trying to chase revenue and you're just trying to chase usage, then sure, you can reach out to people and say, hey, I'm a founder doing this. I saw that XYZ, so maybe something about them. I'm looking for some feedback on this product and to potentially look at some early design partners. A design partner is basically somebody who can work with you to iterate on your product, and they'll give you feedback in exchange for using it. And maybe it's free, maybe it's paid. If you can, go for paid, but that's a whole topic for a different video. But ultimately, get clear on your positioning and how you want to frame yourself. The other thing I would also state as well is that you don't want to lie. I see this quite often, surprisingly, is that people like to just make up statistics that X% of companies are doing this. Well, where'd you get that data from? Because companies aren't generally going out advertising a lot of what their internal mechanics are. So don't lie, don't deceive people, be honest, be upfront, and try to communicate the value that you can provide. Step 4, go to market. Now this is where the nitty-gritty details kick in, and there's 2 ways that you can go about this. The first approach is kind of like how a lead generation agency would approach this. So what they would do is they would buy a series of domains that are similar to your own domain. So never use your primary website for cold outreach, because if you land in spam, what will happen is it'll be a nightmare to get out of spam, and also your SEO health will start to take a nosedive. So avoid it. What an agency would do is they would buy a series of domains, then they would get a series of email inboxes connected to those domains, typically about 3 to 4 per domain. And what they would do is they would ensure that the sending volume per inbox per day is relatively low. So you would probably see maybe 10 to 15 cold emails going out every single day per inbox. And that's on the high end. There's some people who do even less, maybe like 3 or 4, even 5. And you want to keep that volume really low, so that way you're not being flagged for spam. And you want to have multiple domains and multiple email addresses, so if one of those domains or emails goes down, then the rest of your infrastructure isn't going to be affected. So you're kind of hedging your bets. The second thing that they would do is they would set up something called email warm-up. Now, the way you can think about this is there's a series, imagine a series of like 100 email inboxes, and they're all sort of pinging each other, right, with AI-generated messaging, or you could even test out your actual messaging that you would use in some cases. And some of those email inboxes will automatically reply back and forth with just made-up content, right? So it looks like you are basically not a spammer, and that you are, and what will happen is over time, you'll build up your email health and your email reputation. Now, you want to do this for about 2 weeks before you start doing any cold outreach. And even after you've finished that 2-week period, you still want to keep that going, but just on a slightly smaller scale, so you can actually facilitate doing cold outbound. The next thing that an agency would do for you is they would probably set up a cold email system. So they'd set up a bunch of tools that they would use to send out cold emails, right? And they would connect all those inboxes, and they would write up copy, and they would just get cracking. Then outside of that, if your agency would also do LinkedIn outreach, they'd also be setting up another tool connecting to maybe your LinkedIn account to set up LinkedIn automated outreach. So they're reaching out to your prospects. In case if there are people who don't go through with email, then they'll just re-enroll that list inside of a LinkedIn outreach tool. And when they're writing copy, they will typically avoid using any links inside of their emails or email signatures, as well as avoiding photos and attachments. And the reason when you want to do this is because when email servers start to see links, email images and attachments from a foreign email address, or an email address that's not in your contacts, in the prospect's contacts, they are going to start to recognize that as a potential phishing scam and a risk. You'll be at a higher risk to land in the spam folder from the get-go. For LinkedIn, when you do connect with someone, please don't pitch on the first message. It's not a great place. LinkedIn is a social network, and the way that you can sell is by just building a rapport and building a relationship with someone. If you try to pitch someone on the first message, unless your message is I'm selling £1,000 for £100, sure, you're probably going to get a few bites. But in most cases, you probably are not selling you're not selling pounds for pennies. So try to just focus on building a relationship, take interest in that person, and that's probably what an agency would do for you. Now, the second approach is personalized automation. Now, this first approach that I just covered is really good if you have specific words you want to use. You don't want to use a lot of personalization. You kind of just want to reach out to the same audience with the exact same message. Then in that case, that's fine. But on the flip side, if you wanted to do something that's a bit more personalized as well as automated, basically take care of everything that I just mentioned, but instead of having it in like a fragmented tech stack, you've got everything in one singular location. And that can be really good, especially if you only want to do personalized and deep researched outreach. And whichever route you decide to actually take, just make sure that you actually do get like a dedicated platform for sending. Don't use a CRM. You might be tempted to use a CRM to do cold outreach from. It's not a great idea. CRMs are great for doing one thing and one thing only in most cases, and that is just to store data and be able to track deals. That's what they're meant for. Use them as such. Get a dedicated sending platform for doing cold outreach, because they're built for deliverability. If that second approach sounds like something that might resonate more with you, I've left a link down below to my calendar if you want to book a time to speak with me, and I'll walk you through a system of how that would be able to take care of everything from getting domains and emails set up for you, generating research, doing cold outreach across email and LinkedIn, as well as finding the right buyers with their verified contact information completely autonomously for you. I've left a link down below. Feel free to click that, and let's get back to the video. The final step is probably the most important, and that is to iterate. When you're starting off with cold outbound, it's really unlikely that the first time that you start to send outreach is going to be the perfect offer and to the perfect audience. It's just really unlikely. What's more likely is that you probably get ignored. And there's normally 4 components that you want to keep a lookout for. 1 is deliverability, 2 is the messaging, 3 is the audience, and then 4th is the positioning. And typically you want to iterate on one of those 4 things and just make sure that you're getting all of those variables checked off. And maybe what you might find is that there's an issue with the messaging. Maybe it's just too long, or maybe you're targeting the wrong audience, or potentially the way that you're positioning yourself is probably less effective than it could be. So keep refining your product value that we did back in step 1, and keep practicing and refining it and iterating it to find the right alignment and the right positioning for that audience. Test different angles, different offers, different hooks, things that can grab a prospect's attention. Eventually, with a lot of trial and error, you'll be able to actually have something that works. It's also super important that you track the following metrics: your response rate, your positive response rate, and your meeting conversion rate, as well as your cost per meeting set. The last one is really, really important. If you're very budget strapped and you're spending very little money on your email infrastructure, as well as reaching out to a small volume of people, and you're expecting to have ginormous results, then you're going to be very disappointed. A lot of times this just takes a lot of practice, and you want to have a sense of being rooted in reality and not having misaligned expectations. It's okay to be ambitious, it's okay to be optimistic, but it's also important to be rooted in reality. So for example, if you're reaching out to, say, 1,000 people, maybe your first goal can be to just iterate on the positioning and your audience so that you can get 1 meeting. That's a really great goal. And then you can figure out how you can scale up from there. And monitoring your cost per meeting set is really important. And if you're not sure what that looks like, go and find competitors in your space and just prompt ChatGPT to ask it, here's a list of my competitors, assuming that they were doing cold outbound, what would their average cost per meeting set look like? That's something to measure. And then over time, as you develop, what you'll find is that outside of just the cost per meeting, you'll also want to look at your customer acquisition cost. Because a lot of times, especially if you're early stage, you're probably not factoring in your time either. And that does have a cost. So eventually you'll want to calculate that, but in the early stages, it's okay just to start with your cost per meeting set. Now, some final advice. You're going to run into a lot of problems eventually through different stages of the sales funnel. It's important to not be discouraged and just to identify what the problem is. So for example, if you're getting low response rates, is it a case of having poor deliverability? Is it a case of long messaging? Is it a case of choosing the wrong audience? Or is it a case of having bad positioning that doesn't align with that audience? If it's a case of people responding, but they're not responding well, then maybe it's just one of the latter two. So maybe it's just a bad audience, or maybe it's bad positioning or misaligned positioning. If it's a situation where people are responding positively, but they're not converting, maybe that's an issue in the funnel that you need to solve. Maybe your time to responding back to somebody is just too long. Or for example, maybe you're getting people to book meetings, but they're not showing up. Maybe you're just not doing a reminder sequence before that call, such that you're reminding them of that call. Because sometimes people can forget. Or maybe people just aren't accepting the invite on their calendar. Pretty much, you're going to go through a bunch of different hoops and hurdles till you find something that works, and you have to iterate it over time, and things will change over time. You'll find that maybe your ideal customer profile will also change over time. It's always an evolving game. So try your best to stay up to date, and hopefully this video was able to help you. As a final gift to you, in the link down below, I've also added a series of lead lists that are completely free to access that you can start to iterate your messaging on. So hopefully that helps you, and I'll see you in the next one.